Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Kerbal Space Program, back for another update episode. As you recall, the last video I posted, or as you may or may not recall, the last video I posted, I said I was going to undertake a mission to Duna. And while I haven't done the mission in question with the probes landing on Duna and its moon Ike, which I think is over there, I have gotten a couple test spacecraft in orbit around Duna, as you can see, unmanned spacecraft. I like to do that as kind of test before I undertake the real thing so that I can do it with a minimum of pain and suffering on your part and mine. Also, these spacecraft have a lot of fuel in them, so if I need to fuel up for the return mission, assuming I get this far, that would be very handy. I did find out that you really need a couple things to do interplanetary missions, and I will show you why. So if we go out, here's Duna, and let's go over to Kerbin. If you recall my previous mission to the moon, I just kind of set an orbit around Kerbin and the moon with my apoapsis around where the moon was, and I just kind of waited for the moon to come around and capture me. You can't do that planet to planet because in between the two planets you get captured by the sun and you start going around the sun. And while I guess it's theoretically possible to orbit the sun and get captured by a planet, it's inefficient, I think, to say the least. Plus, there's a lot of things out, and you may get captured by Kerbin again before you get captured by Duna. So, after some fooling around, I looked at some tutorials, certainly the Scott Manley tutorial. I could start with, put on my Scottish accent. My Scott Manley tutorial. Is that Scottish? I don't know. Miss Moneypenny. Miss Moneypenny. Come here, please. It's Sean Connery. Anyway, looked at some Scott Manley tutorials, some other ones in the forums and on YouTube, and kind of figured out what you need to do. You need to launch between planets at a specific time of the year so that you go from point A to point B without missing. Now, this isn't the right configuration here because it's the wrong time of the year, but I think there's a couple plugins you need to determine when's the right time to launch. I think the most important is this one, and there's a couple that do this. This may be the best one, called Protractor, and these values will tell you when the proper time is to launch. Basically, these should both be 0. This says what time of the year, and then I think this is your when in your orbit you should be launching, the orbit around the planet you happen to be in. So basically, you increase time until this column, your theta column, right? I forget what this is. Is this mu? Your theta column is 0, and then you wait for your orbit to come around. And as you can see, they're ticking down. Actually, that's kind of ticking down quite fast. That's because I'm orbiting Duna, and this is Duna's moon, so it's a much quicker cycle than interplanetaries. But anyway, so when I was orbiting Kerbin, I waited for my angle to Duna, which you can't see here because I'm at Duna, to go to 0, and then when my orbit got to about 0 here, I did a launch, and basically you just go from zip like that. And again, this isn't the proper positioning, so don't take this configuration as something that's useful, but you'll go from point A to point B and do no orbits at all. You just go there and you get captured. And I must say, getting captured by a planet in interplanetary space is pretty darn hard. So I had a lot of failed missions that just went off to nowhere or I ran out of fuel. But I did do, and let's refocus on Duna, I did do 2 missions that worked. So as you can see, I have 2 unmanned or unkerbled spacecraft here. And the configuration, I'll show you that too because I'm kind of fond of this. The configuration has a large Rockomax, or whatever you call it, fuel tank, and then 3 nuclear engines. This kind of tends to be heavy, and nuclear engines don't have a whole heck of a lot of thrust. And so I put 3 on so you're not burning for an hour to achieve escape velocity from Kerbin. Let's see, is there anything else noteworthy? I put some big solar panels on so it has kind of a 3-way configuration, a tri-something configuration. I think it looks pretty cool. It kind of looks like a real spacecraft. So as you can see in this one, we have about half of our main fuel. And one of the things I had trouble with is radially mounting these nuclear engines. I'm like, how the heck do you radially mount these engines? Because I wanted to put more than one on this thing. And when you put one underneath a fuel tank like this, it tends to overheat. I don't know if that's a bug or what. So I tried a bunch of configurations, and I said, well, why don't I just radially mount these small fuel tanks, which will feed the engine directly, and then tap the large fuel tank into the engine, and that works pretty darn well, and you get a nice amount of thrust. So this is actually the second spacecraft I sent here. The other one, as you can see, so this is in some goofy polar orbit, as you can see. Going planet to planet, it's pretty much, if you can actually hit your destination, it's pretty much, I think, a crapshoot as to what orbit you end up in. Obviously, the better you're at this, the more you can refine it, but these are kind of where these ended up. This spacecraft ended up coming in just over Duna, so I did a break and then was captured in a polar orbit. And this one came in more on the line of the elliptical plane. Also, Ike is pretty darn close to Duna, and it tends to get in your way if you are not careful. Let's switch to this guy. This is my first mission. As you can see, this spacecraft has less fuel, maybe about a quarter left. I actually overshot Duna with that, which brings me to my second plug-in, and had to do a braking maneuver and reorient myself to Duna because I was out past the Duna orbit. The second one is the alarm clock. I would highly recommend this for that. This plugin for this type of mission, because you're going to be elapsing huge amounts of time. The first part is to here, we'll accelerate time just so it looks pretty. Let's not accelerate that much. Okay. So you're going to do lots of time acceleration here, and the windows where you need to burn are relatively small, so if you have it cranked up and you miss your window, then your whole mission is shot. So that's what I did here. I missed a burn window, and I said, I'm not giving up. Did another burn, and kind of came back in from a rendezvous from outside of Duna's orbit. So I think that's pretty much it. So the Kerbal alarm clock you can see here, and then protractor. I think MechJeb may have both of these functions in here. I think this might be a little bit nicer. I don't use MechJeb, so I may not be good at this game, but I'm good at this. Not good at this game without any help. So I think that is it. One other thing you may need to do is, to use the protractor, let me zoom in. So you can see these are set up for docking if need be. Let's see if I can find it. To use the protractor, you have to put this thing on here. It's a little part that I think will allow the protractor plug-in to get your ship's position and all the relative things. So it's actually held on with duct tape. It's a little calculator held on with duct tape here, which I think is quite cute. So you have to add that to your ship. The Kerbal alarm clock, since it's not position-based, it's time offset-based, I guess, does not need a part attached to your ship. But even if you don't have this taped to your ship, for example, the space tug that I originally built doesn't have a protractor on it. So what I can do is use these things in orbit here in the Duna orbit to help calculate a launch back to Kerbin with some degree of accuracy. So that's my plan, at least. I also, let us go back to the Space Center. So anyway, before we do that, let's just zoom back out. So as you can see, I have two of these things here. I'll probably leave them here. I can end the mission, or crash them in the Kerbin, or take them off to another planet. They have reasonably large amounts of fuel left. I also did some updates on one here, which I'll just show you before we leave. I did an aero braking maneuver with the other one, the one that I just switched from, and I folded up the solar panels and forgot to unfold them, and it ran out of power, which meant that the probe engine did not respond. I restored from a save, and for some reason it had a charge, so I was able to unfold the solar panels and bring it back to life. So I did make an upgrade on this one, where I have these little fixed solar panels on the fuselage that even if I fold up the main solar panel, should generate enough to at least keep the probe alive under certain circumstances. And I have some nice lighting here so that you can see this spacecraft in its full elegance or not, depending on what your tastes are. So, let's go back to the Space Center. And what I did was, when I was doing the time acceleration, I just put this little lander can on here with a, there it is, with the protractor taped to the side of it. And then, since I'm not in orbit, I can accelerate time to the maximum, whereas if you're on a 100,000 meter orbit, you can only go up so high before it stops it. So I just put this on the launch pad to do this. I could put it on a little rover and drive it off so that it's always there. But that's what I used to time the initial launch based upon the right time of the year, which would take a huge amount of time if you were in orbit. So let's go to the Space Center. Now let's go to the vehicle assembly bay. I'll show you my latest and greatest rocket. That would be this guy right here. So I did an episode where I kind of talked about my heavy lift rocket that I've been using, and I've refined it further for interplanetary purposes. But I think this also could be used to lift fairly large payloads into space. So the first stage, and let's zoom back so we're not up its nose. The first stage has 5 mainsail rockets and 8 of the large solid rocket boosters. And this will get you up to about 10,000 meters right when you're ready to start doing your gravity turn. So that's nice. That'll take you up, and then you jettison it, and you can start doing your gravity turn. The second stage is 5 skipper engines. 5 skipper engines, and this will take you basically. I got to stop saying basically. Anyway, this will take you up just about into orbit. You want to jettison this before you achieve orbit so it doesn't stay in orbit and it'll fall back into the atmosphere. So that's what this will do. And you'll actually, under certain circumstances, have a little bit of fuel left when you're done with this stage, which is nice. And as you can see, I have this all strutted up. I think the important part is right here on this engine, because there's so much lift force here, it'll crush this engine during ascent. So there's a bunch of struts here to keep that from happening. And I also have some outboard struts going from stage to stage. And in practice, this ship is very stable. I don't get any oscillation, virtually no oscillation, very little roll. And the third stage, as you saw, has these 3 nuclear engines. And you get a ton of fuel out of this thing and the little feeder tanks out of here. And then, as you can see, I have the 3 large solar panels. This is probably definitely overkill, but I like large solar panels. As you can see, there's RCS on it, docking port on the front. I have quantum struts on here, and in this version, I see there's a quantum core. I haven't been using this. Maybe I just missed out. I'm not quite sure what the difference between a quantum strut and a strut gun is. Don't know. I don't know what the difference between these are. So I added a quantum core. I don't know if I need that and I've been missing it or what. But that is my latest and greatest, the pinnacle, if you will, of rocket technology. So, the next mission, which I am just about ready to do, let us go back to the space program, or Space Center. So let's go to our friendly neighborhood space station. Okie dokie. So here's our space station right here. And apparently the lights are off. So as you can see, when you're on the dark side of the planet, it's pretty darn dark. So let's turn the lights on. And there you go. Look at that. That's why I put a lot of lights on everything. Not because I don't like to put a lot of lights on everything just for aesthetics, but when you're on the dark side of the planet, it gets pretty darn dark. And why is the SAS on? Turn that bad boy off. So, yeah, if you were trying to dock with this and it was silhouetted against the planet, that would be challenging. So, anyway, So here is the space tug right here. So what I can do is use that lander on the ground to determine when is the right time. And then I will launch for Duna. So what I'm going to do is undock it from the space station, dock it to the probes that I brought up on a previous mission. I have 4 right here. I want to land 2 on Duna, 1 on Ike, and that'll give me an extra 1 in case I crash one. That either I can leave in orbit or, I don't know, do something amazing with it. So I'm going to undock it from here, pick this up. As you can see, it has a docking port. Undock the combined package from the space station, and then take off for Duna. And then I'll probably upgrade this, put a protractor on it. I may replace this with the interplanetary rockets I've been using with a crew capsule on it, and then start using that, because I think that's a much better design than this. This has 1 nuclear engine, but it should be lighter than the other one, so I think it will behave reasonably. So that's all I got for this one. I did want to do an update as to what I've been up to for KSP, if anybody cares. If you have any comments or questions, please let me know. After the Duna mission, I'll probably be doing a mission to the sun, and maybe put some probes or whatever in orbit around that. This has been Hale. Thank you very much for watching.